Welcome back, everyone. Yes, I know, another video trying to reach out effectively to 3, or maybe 2, or maybe just one Muslim who's been brainwashed by the Islamic echo chamber, while, of course, entertaining the rest of you with my sarcastic, deadpan scorn for Muslim apologists who actually do the brainwashing. For echo chamber inhabitants, here's a warning. This video will be exceedingly complicated. The main concept I want to convey to you will seem more complex than brain surgery. It makes rocket science look simple. Perhaps it will seem utterly beyond your understanding, and maybe for now it is. For the rest of you who do not live in the Muslim apologetic echo chamber, this video will seem insultingly simple. As an apology, I'll present this video in 2 parts. First, the simplistic part, then a more informative segment that I think a lot of you will find thought-provoking. Think of it as a reward for watching the echo chamber stuff and risking some brain damage in the process. Here it is, the echo chamber comment of the day. I see it all the time. The thesis of this comment and many others is always the same. If the Bible describes something happening, then God approves of it happening. That's it. That's the thesis. If the Bible describes Jacob having multiple wives, then God's fine with it. That must be how he wanted it. Examples abound, and of course, it's not just with multiple wives. If the Bible describes someone doing fill in the blank, then the Bible is fine with fill in the blank. So let's give this a try and see if we can do it like the Islamic echo chamber. The comment mentions Jacob. We'll talk about Abraham. In Genesis 20, we read about Abraham being afraid for his life because of Sarah's beauty. People might kill him and take her. So he lies, says she's his sister, and Abimelech takes her. Then Abimelech finds out later from God in a dream that Abraham had lied. God tells Abimelech to return Sarah. It's interesting that God does not scold Abraham directly for his actions. Using echo chamber logic, what do we conclude? Well, obviously, that God approves of lying and giving up your wife to save your own skin. The Bible narrates the event, so God must approve of it. The ignorance involved in such assertions deserves no response, but let's show some grace for a few minutes. First, there's no inherent connection between the Bible describing an event happening and God approving of it. If you echo chamber inhabitants think that there is a connection that suits your polemical purposes, then demonstrate it. Otherwise, you're making yourselves look completely ignorant. This is so obvious, it shouldn't have to be said, but here we are. Second, with respect to the multiple wives issue that this comment addresses, I've discussed in recent videos on this channel that the divine design is given in Genesis. If you don't understand this, then you're no better than the ignorant Pharisees that Jesus corrected in Matthew 19. The creation account is the divine design, and it's reinforced so powerfully in the Bible, not only in Genesis, but by marriage serving as an analogy to the exclusive relationship between God and his people. This is crystal clear in the Bible throughout. And if you want to claim that God approves of multiple wives because some people in the Bible had multiple wives, you are biblically illiterate, or you're being intentionally ignorant to pretend you're making valid criticisms. This is par for the course from echo chamber inhabitants. Third, Genesis describes God's human creation who rebelled against him. When this happened, they lost fellowship with God, who is life. Estrangement from God, evil, and death ensued. The Bible tells the grand story of how God reclaims his people to himself to restore that broken relationship. That story cannot be told unless the failures of people are told along with it. The people in the Bible aren't whitewashed, stock characters. They're fallen people. They need mercy. They need grace. They need salvation, just like us. You can't tell their story or ours without including the bad. And assuming God approves of something like multiple wives, which goes directly against his created order, means you don't even recognize the sin that resulted in the fall of humanity in Genesis 3. If you use these echo chamber arguments, you're no Bible interpreter or Bible reader. you're a fool. But there is a cure outside of the Islamic echo chamber. Fourth, if you've hung around for this long, it's because I promised you something thought-provoking in this video. This obviously poses great risk for echo chamber inhabitants, but they probably checked out long ago, so they're safe. The echo chamber comment refers to events in the Torah, so we'll stay there. Remember Genesis 20 from a few minutes back. I said that God does not scold Abraham for his actions. Are we to assume that God approves of Abraham giving up Sarah? No. Biblical narrative in general, and especially the Torah, demand more sophisticated analysis. We could do scores of videos on this, but here's just one example. The Torah frequently communicates through patterns and themes that wind through it. Reading passages that share these themes together helps us understand both passages more. Some call it intertextuality. This is a lot of text to put on the screen, but I highly encourage you to pause the video and read it, or read Genesis 20, 1 through 13 on your own before continuing this video. Having read the passage, you'll notice how Abimelech is on the defensive with God, how God doesn't speak to Abraham, and how Abimelech says his people are the righteous ones and chastises Abraham the next day. This is one time in Abraham's life where he really messed up, and while we have Abimelech's dream recorded and the king's subsequent interaction with Abraham, there are no narrative comments about Abraham's behavior, right? There's nothing that says, oh, by the way, what Abraham did was bad. Well, that's only if you miss the intertextuality of the Torah. If you read Genesis 20 and think about it, you'll realize that you have heard this story before, and no, I'm not talking about Genesis 12. Consider these parallels, many of which are dominant themes throughout the Torah, not just Genesis. Abimelech is deceived with something, or in this case, someone, pleasing to the eye, because recall that Sarah was a very beautiful woman. If he would have touched her, he would have surely died. Precisely the same words as Genesis 3. This beautiful woman will bring him certain death, like the beautiful tree in the midst of the garden. Abimelech's question appears odd at first. What did you see that made you do this? But seeing is a frequent problem in the Torah because people see what is good in their own eyes, apart from seeking divine guidance or following God's instruction. And Abraham's response to Abimelech, like Adam's response to God in Genesis 3, is deeply inadequate and appears to blame God. So in Genesis 20, God doesn't speak to Abraham, Abimelech does. After God appears to Abimelech in a dream, the king is acting like a prophet. Sadly, God informs Abimelech that Abraham is a prophet. That should have been made obvious to Abimelech by Abraham himself, through his character and his actions. But Abraham had erred so greatly that it took divine revelation to the king to correct the issue, and it's Abimelech who's outraged at the moral atrocity that Abraham had set him up to commit. So is the Torah silent on Abraham's conduct? Not remotely. What Abraham does is intentionally described, uncomfortably, like the deception in Genesis 3, and Abraham had done this once before already in Genesis 12. And Isaac does the same thing in Genesis 26. Deception continues to rip through Abraham's family. It's tragic. These stories of deception happen over and over. One example of repetition in the Torah. Wow, look at all those people and the mistakes that they made. But that's part of the wisdom of the Torah. The repetition I've been referring to is repetition because it's still being repeated since Genesis. If we're honest, we probably don't read these stories too long without seeing ourselves in them. Have I ever used deceit? Have I ever victimized someone else? If I wrote the story of my life, would it fit uncomfortably well alongside of some of these stories of rebellion that we see in the Torah? This is the type of meditation the Torah prompts. It's sophisticated literature, the complete opposite of how brainwashed Muslims are taught to think about it. And if you're a Muslim who made it to this part of the video and tried to comprehend some of it, well, that makes me happy. And it certainly means that there's hope for you outside of the echo chamber should you choose to step out. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.